Chapter 7 of Bill the Conqueror by P.G. Wodehouse. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Mr. Slingsby invites suspicion. It is one of the delightful features of the English spring that days occur in it. In fact, it is almost entirely composed of days on which, as evening draws in, the temperature is such as to render an open fire agreeable, even necessary. The one that blazed in the grate of the sitting-room of Bill's flat in Marmont Mansions, Battersea, some 10 days after Flick's impulsive departure from Holly House, was large and cheerful. It threw warm beams of golden light on the Celium sleeping on the rug, on Bill smoking in an armchair, on Flick snug on the settee, her fair head bent over a pair of Bill's socks, which she was darning. Bill, his pipe drawing nicely, had fallen into a pleasant train of thought. After that hectic night in the gardens of Holly House, life had settled down to a smooth placidity. Flick was comfortably established now in a bed-sitting-room round the corner, having stumbled by good fortune on a house whose landlady, so far from objecting to dogs, had welcomed Bob with a motherly warmth, and was now conducting a campaign of systematic overfeeding, which had already begun to have grave effects on his figure. This admirable woman could also cook in a manner rare among her kind, so that Flick, though after the magnificence of Holly House she could hardly hope to find a bed-sitting-room luxurious, had no complaints to make, except for an occasional spasm of remorse brought on by remembrance of her Uncle Sinclair. She was enjoying life hugely. She liked the novel feeling of freedom. She liked the sense of adventure. And she particularly liked these daily visits to the home of Bill and Judson. The only phenomena in her new world which she did not like were those 12 photographs of Alice Coker, which seemed to stare at her with a hostile disdain every time she entered this room. She had now come definitely to the conclusion that she detested Alice Coker. To Bill, also, the present trend of life seemed wholly excellent. In a vague way he realized that things could not go on like this forever, but he did not allow the thought to diminish his happiness. Being at an age when one does not look very piercingly into the future, he was satisfied to enjoy the moment, soothed by the atmosphere of quiet and spluttering fires and sock-mending. He could not remember a time when anyone had ever darned socks for him. In the days of his careless prosperity he had simply worn the things until the holes became too vast even for his uncritical tolerance, and then had thrown them away. He lay back in his armchair, watching Flick's busy fingers, and told himself that this was life as it should be lived. Flick's fingers stopped their rhythmic movement. She looked up. "What has become of Mr. Coker?" she asked. She was fond of Judson. He had at last got over his embarrassing habit of gaping at her like a fish, as if the sight of her in his sitting-room made his senses reel, and there existed between them a firm and growing friendship. Their relations were like those of a modified Desdemona and Othello. She liked him for the hardships he was undergoing, and he liked her that she did not pity them. Judson had never met a girl more sweetly disposed to listen to his troubles. In a black world, Flick restored his faith in human nature. "He told me he was going to look up Slingsby," said Bill, and felt the faint pricking of conscience which always came to him when the name of the London manager of the Paradine Pulp and Paper Company was mentioned. Recently he had rather permitted the dynamic Mr. Slingsby to pass out of his life, and the thought sometimes made him uncomfortable. He had achieved, he realized, absolutely nothing in the direction of fulfilling the mission which his Uncle Cooley had entrusted to him, and more this visit of his to London was beginning to take on the aspect of a pleasant vacation. This was all wrong, of course, but on the other hand, what could he do? As his uncle had justly remarked, if Wilfrid Slingsby was baffled by the problem of why the profits had fallen off, what chance had a novice like himself to solve it? "I didn't know he knew Mr. Slingsby," said Flick. "Oh, yes. I took him round to the office the other day and introduced him." Flick resumed work on the sock. "I've been thinking," she said. "I don't like what you told me about Mr. Slingsby." "Oh, he's all right," said Bill, with the tolerance bred of physical well-being. "I can't help feeling he may be crooked." Bill smiled indulgently. This, he supposed, was what they called feminine intuition. The only trouble with it was that it didn't work. Common sense had long since caused him to abandon the doubts he had once entertained of Mr. Slingsby's honesty. "Oh, I don't know," he said. "I wouldn't say I liked the man, but I don't suspect him of anything like that. It's true he has let the profits fall off." "And yet you say he was such a capable man." "Yes, but he explained the whole thing to me the day I lunched with him. I couldn't quite follow all of it, but it seemed straight enough. Business conditions, and all that sort of thing, you know." "I see," said Flick, and there was a brief silence. Bill changed the subject. "I've been thinking, too." "Yes?" "Wondering," said Bill, "what your people are saying about your running away. It seems odd there hasn't been anything in the papers." "Uncle George would never allow anything to get into the papers. He would be much too afraid of the scandal." "They never put any reply to your letter in the personal column of the Mail. It begins to look as if they intended to stick it out." "Yes." "What will you do if they don't climb down?" Flick looked up with a quick flash of her cornflower eyes. That sudden impish way she had of jerking up her head always fascinated Bill. It reminded him of a startled kitten. "I shall get a job somewhere. I'm pretty good at typing, and I can do a sort of shorthand. I used to work with Uncle Sinclair a lot at one time. At any rate, I'm not going back to marry Roderick." "I should say not. Anything," said Bill sententiously, "is better than marrying someone you don't love. Love is worth waiting for. One of these days you're bound to find a man you'll fall in love with." "Am I?" "Absolutely bound to. Comes over you like a flash, you know, quite suddenly." "Does it?" "I remember when I first met Alice." "What sort of a girl is Miss Coker?" Flick interrupted. "What sort of a—" Bill found himself at something of a loss for words. It is a tough job describing goddesses. "Why, but I've told you all about her a lot of times." "So you have," said Flick demurely, returning to the sock. "It's been wonderful having somebody like you to talk to about Alice," said Bill. "Judson isn't much use in that way, but you're different. You're a real pal. I can—" "Would she mend your socks?" asked Flick. The question seemed to disconcert Bill. He had recently come to regard sock-mending as one of the noblest pursuits of woman, and it pained him to discover anything even remotely resembling a flaw in Miss Coker's perfection. But the fact had to be faced. Try as he might to envisage Alice mending socks, he could not do it. "She's rather the dashing sort of society type of girl, you know," he said, and was aghast to find himself speaking quite apologetically. "I see." There was a silence. From the fire a few glowing fragments of coal dribbled into the grate. The cilium on the rug gave a little whine as he chased rats through dreamland. "Don't you usually write to her on Tuesdays?" said Flick carelessly. "Good Lord!" Bill dropped his pipe and stared at her with fallen jaw. "I'd clean forgotten." "You'd better go and do it now, or you'll miss the mail." Bill was conscious of a peculiar sensation. Analyzing this, he was horrified to realize that for an instant what he had been feeling was a reluctance to get out of his chair, a strange evil shrinking from the delightful task of writing a long letter to the girl he loved. For one ghastly moment the thing had seemed a bore. Letters at No. 9 Marmont Mansions, Battersea, had to be written in the dining-room, it happening to contain the only table in the flat that did not sway like a lily if leaned upon, and somehow the thought of leaving this cozy fireside and going into the dining-room depressed Bill. His better nature asserted itself. He heaved himself up and left the room. Flick, laying down the half-mended sock, sat gazing into the fire. Then, with a little impatient wriggle, she started sewing again. She had been sewing for some minutes when the door opened and Judson came in. "Hello," said Flick. "We were wondering where you were. Is anything the matter?" Judson had flung himself moodily into the chair which Bill had vacated, disillusionment and dejection written plainly on his speaking countenance. He was not proof against this womanly sympathy. "Look here," he said, "I'll tell you all about it. You've got a kind heart. You're not the sort who would simply kid a fellow." "I should hope not." "Well, then, look here. You know as well as I do that there are moments, especially in this beastly country, where the wind always seems to be blowing from the east, when a fellow just has to have a nip of the right stuff to keep the cold out. It's a simple matter of health. Medicinal. Ask any doctor. You admit that, don't you?" "If it makes you any happier." "Well, with Bill West behaving like a darned policeman, I'm pretty much up against it in this direction." "He says he's only doing it for your good." "Oh, I've no doubt he has some story to explain his behavior," said Judson coldly. "Besides, he promised your sister to look after you." "There is only one word," said Judson with asperity, "to describe Bill's attitude of groveling servility to my sister Alice, and that word is sickening. It isn't as if she cared a hang about him." "Doesn't she?" "Not a whoop." "But I thought they were engaged." "Perhaps they are. But be that as it may, you can take it from me that she's just using him. I'm very fond of her, as a matter of fact, and she has always been decent to me. But a girl may be all right as far as her brother's concerned, and still be a rough citizen when it comes to other men. Much as I like Alice, it's no use kidding myself that she's not a flirt. Ever since I've known her, she's always had a dozen fellows on a string. Mark my words, she'll let Bill down. Yes, sir. One of these days that boy is slated to get a jar that'll shake his back teeth out." Flick, though she felt she would have liked to hear more on this theme, reluctantly decided at this point that she had no business to be encouraging these revelations. With a strong effort, therefore, she changed the subject. "That's too bad, isn't it?" she said. "But what were you going to tell me? When you came in, you know, you said I had a kind heart and wouldn't make fun of you." "Oh, yes." The animation with which Judson had been discussing his sister left him. His moodiness returned. He spoke in a minor key, as befitted a painful story. "I was saying that in this beastly, raw, windy weather a fellow has simply got to have a drink now and then, or his health gets undermined. And the trouble, as far as I'm concerned, is that it's a darned tough proposition to know which way to turn. This afternoon I thought I would try an outside chance." "What did you do?" asked Flick, wondering. She had visions of Judson counterfeiting spectacular fainting fits in the middle of the street in the hope of getting restored with brandy. I went to see if I could touch that man Slingsby. Mr. Slingsby? What ever made you go to him? Well, he's old Paradine's London manager, and Bill is old Paradine's nephew, and I'm Bill's best pal. It isn't as if there wasn't a sort of moral obligation. Anyway, I called on him at about 4 this afternoon. I can see now that I didn't choose a particularly good time for my visit. The man was in a thoroughly nasty temper, having, I discovered, just fired his stenographer. Why was that? I didn't find out, though I sat there all ready to be confided in if he wanted to slip me an earful. He isn't what you would call a very cordial sort of bird, that fellow. In fact, the whole atmosphere seemed to get so strained after I'd been there about an hour and a quarter that I was in two minds about going away and leaving him flat. Only I wanted that drink, you understand. So I stuck around, and eventually he decided to close the office and put the cat out for the night and call it a day. It was then getting on for 6, and he said he was going home. I said I hadn't anything to do for a while, so I would come along with him. He must have got very fond of you by this time, said Flick. Well, I don't know, said Judson doubtfully. He seemed to me a trifle grouchy. That's strange. How do you account for that? It beats me, said Judson. But mind you, I wasn't worrying a whole lot about it. What I was thinking about was that drink. By the way, said Flick, is this story going to end happily? Eh? I mean, does it end with you getting a drink? Judson laughed a gruesome laugh. Oh, I got a drink, all right. He scowled darkly at the fire. I'm coming to that. We left the office and got into the man's car. Has he a car? What sort? I forget. He did tell me. Winch something? Winchester Murphy? That's right. Big gray limousine. Expensive? Looked as if it had cost the earth. And that's what makes it all so infernally despicable. Here's this man rolling in money, and I gave him every opportunity to invite me to dinner. But he wouldn't bite. This was after he had got to his house. Oh, he has a house, has he? As well as a big car? Where does he live? Burton Street? No, Bruton Street. It's off that square, what's its name? By Devonshire House. Berkeley Square? That's it, Berkeley Square. You turn to the right. He lives halfway down in a biggish house on the left side. Well, he got out, and he opened the door with his latchkey and stood there looking at me in a sort of expectant way. So I came in, and after a bit I came straight out with it as a man to man and asked him if I could have a drink. And he said, certainly. It's very curious, said Flick meditatively, that he should have this expensive car and live in a place like Bruton Street. And when it came, what do you think it was? It costs a lot living anywhere round there. It was cocoa, said Judson somberly. A cup of cocoa on a tray. And when I looked at it in a sort of stupor, if you understand what I mean, he said that Bill had told him that I was a strict teetotaler. Bill, mind you, who's been my friend for more than 15 years. I explained this to Slingsby Bird, that he had got the facts all wrong, and hadn't he a drop of Scotch about the place? And the man, with a beastly mocking smile, said that cocoa was much better for me than Scotch, as, in addition to being warming, it contained nourishing fats. And then he said, would I excuse him, as he had to dress for dinner? I can't understand it, said Flick. If he lives in Bruton Street and has an expensive car, He must be quite rich." "Crawling with money, and that's what makes it all the more—" "But he can't get such a big salary as manager for Mr. Paradine's. I wonder how much the London manager of a firm like Mr. Paradine's would get a year?" Judson was impressed. "I see what you're driving at," he said. "You mean the fellow's a crook. I can well believe it." "Of course he might have private means." "That's true," said Judson, damped. "But if he had, he would hardly go on being just manager for someone else. He would be in business on his own account. A man in his position wouldn't be paid much more than £1,000 a year." "If that." "I don't see how he does it. I want to think this out. You see, as far as I can make out from Bill, old Mr. Paradine has not paid very much attention to his business for the last few years. He's wrapped up in his old books and has just left things alone. It would be a splendid opportunity for a man in Mr. Slingsby's position to do something underhand." "And he's just the man who would do it." "He's so clever, you mean?" "I wasn't thinking of that so much," said Judson. "What I feel is that there must be practically nothing to which a fellow who would offer another fellow cocoa on an evening like this wouldn't stoop. That's the way I look at it. And laughing nastily, mind you, while doing so." Chapter 7